The Pentagon has given Anthropic a deadline of 5:01 p.m. today to make a decision. Either allow the US federal government to use Anthropic's systems for any reason they deem necessary, including mass surveillance of Americans and lethal autonomous weapons, all powered through AI, or the US government may invoke a Cold War era law to seize Anthropic's AI technologies anyways, while simultaneously deeming them a national security risk and making it so that all of their government contracts are null and void. This standoff is frightening for a few reasons. One, it reveals how far the US military under Donald Trump is willing to go with AI, using it to make life or death decisions that it's fundamentally incapable of making. Two, the Pentagon's threat here marks a potentially unprecedented escalation by the US government to not only seize a private AI company's technology, but also retaliate against them in ways that could crush them. Be sure to subscribe to Courier's YouTube video for more coverage like this. My name is Kat Tenbarge. I'm an independent journalist partnering with Courier, and you can read more of my reporting at spitfirenews.com. The Washington Post reported today on the behind the scenes conflict that led to this public showdown between the Pentagon and Anthropic over whether the Pentagon should be able to use this AI technology to determine whether people live or die. This is a pretty frightening scenario for a number of obvious reasons. One, AI technology like Claude is fundamentally incapable of making life or death decisions. It's actually incapable of even giving the right answers 100% of the time, since all AI technology like Claude, ChatGPT, and XAI, they all hallucinate information on a regular basis. And AI companies have explained that at this point in the technology's evolution, there's no way to stop that from happening. So even if you're just using AI to help you with your homework or your job, you are guaranteed to be getting false, misleading, and just plain wrong information a certain percentage of the time. And there's nothing that AI companies can do about that because the technology has yet to be perfected and may never be perfected. So handing over the ability to determine military targets and kill them to an AI tool that is guaranteed to make mistakes a certain percentage of the time is a recipe for disaster. And more specifically, a recipe for extrajudicial murder, which is something that the Trump administration is already familiar with. So clearly, the Trump administration, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, and the Pentagon in its current state under this leadership has no problem with just killing random people to accomplish its end goals, even if those end goals make no sense. But Anthropic, as a private AI company, does have some ethical concerns around this and has established two red lines. No mass surveillance using AI technology, since there's no legal framework for even doing that. And two, no relying on AI technology to kill people. Pretty obvious, clear red lines that you would think everyone could agree on. And I'm not usually the type to be charitable to AI technology companies, but considering that Anthropic is standing in the way of the US government being able to use AI to kill people, in this case, these AI CEOs might be the only thing between us and tech dystopia. But let's not give them too much credit. They're the reason why we arrived at this place to begin with. The Washington Post reports that a key discussion led to a lot of this public standoff that's happening now, and both Anthropic and the US government completely disagree on what happened during this conversation. But according to the Washington Post, a defense official said the Pentagon's technology chief whittled the debate down to a life and death nuclear scenario at a meeting last month. If an intercontinental ballistic missile was launched at the United States, could the military use Anthropic's Claude AI system to help shoot it down? Now, considering that most of us can easily recall examples where AI systems were catastrophically stupid, the very idea that an AI might be the only thing standing between the United States and nuclear destruction is a terrifying prospect to consider, period. Washington Post tech reporter Drew Harwell had a pretty darkly funny response to this, imitating what something like Claude would say in response to being asked to do this. It's not nuclear vaporization, it's annihilation. And honestly, you'll love a fresh start. So I don't even think Claude has the technological capability to be able to handle a situation like this, but the Pentagon is leveraging these hypothetical worst case scenarios in a classic bid for power over the private company it's trying to intimidate into doing whatever it wants. And allegedly, Anthropic responded by basically saying, you could call us and we'd work it out. But the Washington Post went on to report that an Anthropic spokesperson denied its CEO gave that response, saying that account is patently false and that the company has agreed to allow Claude to be used for missile defense. But that alleged conversation, as well as questions from Anthropic about Claude's use in the capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro a couple months ago, both have allegedly led to this sort of conflict that's now playing out very clearly in the public eye. Specifically, the White House's AI advisor, David Sachs, as well as representatives of the Pentagon, have taken to their X accounts to publicly bash Anthropic. David Sachs said Anthropic is running a sophisticated regulatory capture strategy based on fear mongering. It is principally responsible for the state regulatory frenzy that is damaging the startup ecosystem. For people who don't speak Silicon Valley tech bro, what David Sachs is getting at here is he's saying that Anthropic is trying to leverage valid fears and concerns around AI to stop the US government from just having a doctrine to do whatever it wants with AI technology. And he's referring to that as fear mongering. Although I think that the fear that AI could launch an autonomous missile is pretty well intentioned. That is a very terrifying prospect, considering that Google's AI just a couple of years ago was telling people to put glue on their cheese pizza to keep the cheese from sliding off. The AI industry has yet to prove to us that its technology is safe, that its technology is effective, or that its technology is even worth the billions of dollars that are currently propping up the US economy and could crash it at any given moment. AI has now become so deeply embedded into our society. And what's particularly frightening about that is that AI technology doesn't even work. Like I said, with the hallucinations, those are guaranteed to occur. Why on earth would you rely on AI technology over human beings to make decisions about whether or not people will be killed? But David Sachs has a vested interest in not allowing government regulation of AI because he's deeply embedded in the AI industry itself and has a lot of money in the proliferation of AI technology. It's ultimately in his best interest for the US government to be able to have these AI contracts and to be able to use AI however it wishes. At the exact same time, the Trump administration that David Sachs is advising has pushed against the ability for states to be able to regulate AI themselves, even though AI has already caused catastrophic issues across our society, with deepfakes and non consensual AI generated sexually explicit material just being the tip of the iceberg in terms of the damage that AI has already dealt to our society and will likely continue to deal in the future. Even outside these hypotheticals about nuclear weapons, we've already seen AI wreak havoc across workplaces, in academic settings, and in people's personal lives. There are people with mental illnesses that have been dramatically worsened because AI contributes to their delusions. And as the Washington Post reported, this is one of the concerns that people have about the use of AI in military decision making, which is that the AI could encourage more violence. Specifically, the Washington Post reported that still leaves room for AI to influence decisions on targets and speed of response, even if there is a human ultimately involved in the decision making. Quote, in a recent nuclear war game at King's College London, many leading language models, including versions of ChatGPT, Claude, and Google's Gemini, all quickly favored launching warheads. That could influence a human's decision to fire, said Paul Dean, vice president of the global nuclear program at the nonprofit Nuclear Threat Initiative. Quote, it's not simply ensuring that there's a human being in the decision making loop. The question is, to what extent will AI impact that human decision making? We've already seen that AI is built with biases embedded into the programming. AI is less likely to generate pictures of non white people. It's less likely to generate images of women if they're not in a sexualized context. AI is embedded with all of the biases from the training data it scrapes, which includes random stuff on the open web, as well as as copyrighted material like books and articles. So all of this previous amassed human knowledge has been fed into AI for AI to make decisions based on stuff human beings have already said and done, which means that all of that stuff that already has biases baked in is now baked into what the AI is saying. It's influenced by humans who are imperfect, and then it's influencing humans on the other side. And all of this could lead to a sort of feedback loop where AI is encouraging these departments of defense to be more violent, more offensive, more deadly, more fatal at a time when de escalation might actually be a better solution. The more we hand over military decision making to AI, the more I fear there will be unnecessary bloodshed, violence, and consequences for generations to come. And no matter what AI boosters like David Sachs or the Trump administration are saying, that's not something we can just mess around with. People have every reason to be concerned here. And honestly, we need independent decision makers outside of the Pentagon and the AI companies themselves. But that is not what we're getting. Instead, we're getting these incredibly toxic slap fights where people are playing around with questions of life or death. Take this X post from Undersecretary of War Emil Michael, who posted, "It's a shame that at Dario Amodei, who is the CEO of Anthropic, is a liar and has a God complex. He wants nothing more than to try to personally control the US military and is okay putting our nation's safety at risk. The Department of War will always adhere to the law, but not bend to the whims of any one for profit tech company." If you look under the replies to this post, the obvious response here is to point out the fact that the US Department of War, or Department of Defense as it was previously called, has not historically aligned to what is legal, nor is it currently doing what is technically legal. They shoot first, defend their actions in court later, but that doesn't help any of the people they kill or the families who they impact forever. So, no, the Department of War is not adhering to what's legal in all cases, and there is no sign that they will do that in the future with unmitigated access to these AI systems. In fact, what history and our present circumstances tell us is that they will use these AI systems to dramatically escalate their unlawful actions against Americans and foreign enemies alike. Plus, it is so ironic for Emil Michael to call Dario Amodei a liar with a God complex, considering who we currently have sitting in the Oval Office. Who is more of a liar with a God complex than Donald Trump? And Pete Hegseth doesn't look too great either with his own personal track record. So, again, I am not the person to be defending big tech CEOs, but these allegations are so clearly designed to deflect from what the US military really wants to do with these AI systems, which should frighten everyone. And then we have Sean Parnell, who is the assistant to the Secretary of War for Public Affairs and the chief Pentagon spokesman. And this is what he had to say on X. He said the Department of War has no interest in using AI to conduct mass surveillance of Americans, which is illegal, nor do we want to use AI to develop autonomous weapons that operate without human involvement. This narrative is fake and being peddled by leftists in the media. Here's what we're asking: allow the Pentagon to use Anthropic's model for all lawful purposes. This is a simple common sense request that will prevent Anthropic from jeopardizing critical military operations and potentially putting our warfighters at risk. We will not let any company dictate the terms regarding how we make operational decisions. They have until 5:01 p.m. ET on Friday to decide. Otherwise, we will terminate our partnership with Anthropic and deem them a supply chain risk for the Department of War. This is in response to Google's chief scientist for AI posting, "Mass surveillance violates the Fourth Amendment and has a chilling effect on freedom of expression. Surveillance systems are prone to misuse for political or discriminatory purposes." And funnily enough, this US government spokesperson's post has a community note saying that Pete Hegseth and the Department of War are requiring that Anthropic remove usage guidelines that prevent Claude for autonomous weaponry and mass surveillance. Because here's the thing, they can claim that's not what they're trying to use Claude for, but first of all, why would we trust the US government when they say they don't want to surveil us? How has that worked out for us in the very immediate past, present, and future? The US government has long surveilled as many people as it can, including Americans, which is at the heart of the issue that people like Edward Snowden exposed as whistleblowers. Nonetheless, track record aside, this post doesn't even make sense given the exact nature of this situation. Anthropic and Claude are already being used by the US Department of Defense, so the only thing that they won't allow themselves to be used for are these purposes that they're claiming they don't want to do. So if the government is telling the truth, why would there be a conflict in the first place? He said, I believe deeply in the existential importance of using AI to defend the United States and other democracies and to defeat our autocratic adversaries. Anthropic has therefore worked proactively to deploy our models to the Department of War and the intelligence community. We were the first frontier AI company to deploy our models in the US government's classified networks, the first to deploy them at the national laboratories, and the first to provide custom models for national security customers. Claude is extensively deployed across the Department of War and other national security agencies for mission critical applications such as intelligence analysis, modeling and simulation, operational planning, cyber operations, and more. And then scrolling down a little bit, he goes on to say, however, in a narrow set of cases, we believe AI can undermine rather than defend democratic values. Some uses are also simply outside the bounds of what today's technology can safely and reliably do. Two such use cases have never been included in our contracts with the Department of War, and we believe they should not be included now. That is mass domestic surveillance and fully autonomous weapons. To our knowledge, these two exceptions have not been a barrier to accelerating the adoption and use of our models within our armed forces to date. The Department of War has stated they will only contract with AI companies who accede to any lawful use and remove safeguards in the cases mentioned above. They have threatened to remove us from their systems if we maintain these safeguards. They have also threatened to designate us a supply chain risk, a label reserved for US adversaries, never before applied to an American company, and to invoke the Defense Production Act to force the safeguards removal. These latter two threats are inherently contradictory. One labels us a security risk, the other labels Claude as essential to national security. Regardless, these threats do not change our position. We cannot, in good conscience, accede to their request. Now, some members of Congress have begun making the argument that these decisions shouldn't be up to either the Pentagon or Anthropic, and that ultimately Congress should have the power to legislate how these AI technologies are used. And in line with the Constitution and checks and balances, that makes a lot of sense. But part of what's really going on here, as Vox explains, is that this battle with Anthropic is really a war over who controls AI. So, bypassing Congress entirely, this is shaping up to be more of a tug of war between the private AI industry and the US's executive branch. And ultimately, we shouldn't trust the stakeholders on either side of this because they've all proven to be completely corrupt, entangled with one another, and have incentives that rely more on building their personal wealth than protecting Americans and the rest of the world fairly. It's interesting to note that according to Vox, the relationship between the Department of Defense and Anthropic started going sideways, quote, after the operation in early January that resulted in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Claude, according to reporting by Axios, was deployed during the operation through a platform operated by the very military friendly AI company Palantir. Soon after the operation, an Anthropic employee reportedly asked a Palantir counterpart how Claude might have been used in the operation, apparently in a way that indicated Anthropic might have a problem with it. Palantir then allegedly flagged the discussion for the Pentagon, and the Pentagon was already reportedly unhappy with Anthropic's insistence on its red lines. The company has not been included so far on the GenAI.military platform the department built out in late 2025. At a speech in January, Hegseth pointedly said that we will not employ AI models that won't allow you to fight wars. This is so disturbing because the US military under Donald Trump wants to use AI for extremely violent means. And we already know that the Trump administration is more interested in world domination than anything else. They want to essentially use AI to bomb and take over the rest of the world. And that is not an exaggeration. It's just repeating some variation of things that Donald Trump has already said. Donald Trump has promised to unilaterally punish countries if he doesn't get what he wants. He's tried to take over places like Canada and Greenland. He's gone into countries like Venezuela to capture their sitting leaders. And there's really no end to his violent wishes to essentially accumulate as much power as he humanly can. And with the advent of AI technology, they're attempting to use non human resources to do so. Ironically, I do not think these AI technologies are advanced enough to actually help them do that, but that doesn't change how disturbing the underlying premise of this whole argument actually is. And these AI companies are incredibly politicized. You have Anthropic, which has been somewhat opposed to the Trump administration, but then you have companies like Palantir and Elon Musk's XAI, which are literally embedded within the Trump administration. Government organizations like ICE already rely on companies like Palantir and their AI technology for surveillance, while Elon Musk has anti woke XAI like Grok on X. And Musk's company just signed its own contracts with the Department of Defense to gain access to classified information. So, this isn't just a war around AI and red line principles, it's also who's willing to be the most violent and anti woke to curry favor with Trump's government, get billion-dollar contracts, and, casually, possibly help lead to the downfall of human civilization as we know it. So, yes, this story is important. This deadline and what the US government might do to coerce Anthropic for use of its technology is very important. And although I don't think AI is actually advanced enough to do the things that the Pentagon wants it to do, it is incredibly worrying nonetheless that the US is continuing to escalate its power in increasingly violent and corrupt ways, and that it's willing to use AI technology that isn't even there yet to do it. The biggest question is what human lives will be lost in this rush to grab power.